The lifeblood of the braking system comes in many varieties, and selecting the right stuff is going to ensure that when you need to slow down, nothing out of the ordinary happens. We all like knowing exactly what happens next when we press the brake, right? Well, let's learn about brake fluids then. Every brand is going to say they have the best formula in one way or another, but what really sets brake fluids apart is their boiling point. It's important to keep air out of your braking system because it's a gas which can be compressed. If you press the brake pedal and there's gas in your line, you're going to be compressing that first before actually pressing your brake components together to create friction to slow the vehicle down. If your brake fluid gets hot enough to start boiling, the liquid turns into a gas and you'll be compressing gas instead of slowing the vehicle down. Having a brake fluid with a sufficiently high boiling point is vital to avoiding this issue. While it would be nice if brake fluid manufacturers would simply put the boiling point on the bottle, they are sorted into different threshold levels by meeting various Department of Transportation standards. These appear with the acronym DOT followed by a number. As far as I can find, DOT-1 never existed, and while DOT-2 did exist, it was simply an approval with no boiling point specifications. DOT-3 is the base level brake fluid you can find on store shelves today and is the specification most basic passenger vehicles call for. It is primarily glycol ether and has a dry boiling point of 401 degrees Fahrenheit and a wet boiling point of 284 degrees Fahrenheit. We'll get into what dry versus wet means soon. DOT-4 is the next step up and adds borate ester to the glycol ether. It has a higher boiling point in both dry and wet at 446 and 311 degrees Fahrenheit respectively. DOT-5 is an odd brake fluid that broke the ease of the naming system and compatibility. It is a silicone-based brake fluid which is completely incompatible with DOT-3, 4, or 5.1 brake fluids and braking systems. DOT 5.1 is a specification that matches 5 but with the same chemical base as DOT 4 brake fluid. Both DOT 5 and 5.1 specifications have a dry boiling point of 500 degrees Fahrenheit and a wet boiling point of 356 degrees Fahrenheit. A needlessly confusing numbering system, but it's important to pay attention to. Putting DOT 5 brake fluid in a brake system that calls for anything else can lead to brake failure in multiple locations because the seals in every brake component need to be compatible with silicone and often aren't. Putting this stuff in can be a multi-$1,000 mistake, whereas putting DOT 5.1 in a DOT 4 system is an upgrade. A less standard naming system exists that adds onto the DOT number system. If you come across a product with a name like DOT 4 Plus, Super DOT 4, DOT 4 LV, or DOT 5.1 ESP, these may be lower viscosity versions of the standard formulations. These help move fluid efficiently through small passageways found in more advanced anti-lock brake and traction control systems, especially in colder climates. These classifications are not standardized, so you will have to compare product stats with what your vehicle calls for to ensure the fluid has the required properties. So what about wet and dry boiling points? For starters, it's important to be aware that glycol ether fluids, that's DOT-3 and up, excluding the silicone-based DOT-5, are hygroscopic. For what we're talking about today, that just means that it wants to absorb water from the surrounding air. As brake fluid gradually absorbs moisture, its boiling point drops. That is why brake fluid needs to be changed periodically, because over time the brake fluid becomes less capable of handling situations where extreme heat may be generated. That's things like emergency stops and towing, and that's when you need it the most. Also, while brake fluid is formulated to not be corrosive, water can make brake fluid slightly acidic, which can slowly corrode the internals of brake components. How do I know what brake fluid to use? Typically, either the cap on your brake fluid reservoir and/or your vehicle's owner's manual will tell you what brake fluid to use. Generally, you want to stick with that, but there are some cases where you can upgrade. Never ever downgrade. In a pinch, it's better to have DOT-3 and a DOT-4 braking system if nothing else is available, but only carefully drive to where you can get that DOT-3 flushed out and replaced with DOT-4. If a manufacturer calls for DOT-4 over DOT-3, there's a reason. It's more expensive than DOT-3, and if they could save money by filling tens or hundreds of thousands of cars with the less expensive fluid, you bet they would. I feel like I need to repeat this here. If the system calls for DOT-5, use only DOT-5. If it calls for anything else, don't use DOT-5. They don't mix and can make brake components inoperable. How do I know when it's time to change my brake fluid? Like other fluids, brake fluid has a service interval. However, if you get a used car or simply lost track of when your vehicle's last brake flush was, you still have a few options. A brake fluid tester can be used to see how much water the brake fluid has absorbed, except for with DOT5, which is hydrophobic and doesn't mix with water. If your brake fluid has absorbed too much moisture, you should change it regardless of the interval schedule. In fact, if you know your fluid is pretty new and it has already absorbed a lot of moisture, either your brake fluid got contaminated in the bottle or moisture is getting in rapidly. That could be the indication of a leak which needs to be addressed immediately, or your brake fluid reservoir cap isn't making a good seal. An imprecise way you can tell that the brake fluid has gone bad is simply by looking at the brake fluid. Fresh brake fluid straight out of the container typically has an amber or apple juice-like color, but can vary. If your brake fluid is getting hazy and dark, it has picked up contaminants. While there is some gray area in that, all I can recommend is that if your brake fluid is contaminated, flush it out. It's the braking system, and you don't want to leave it to chance, and I certainly can't see what you're looking at. Also, a car that is just sitting dormant in the garage, not being driven anywhere, that's going to need a brake flush too. Over time, moisture gets in, and it doesn't care if the car gets driven or not. Also, going by appearance can help you determine if it's bad, but it's not going to be able to tell you that it's definitely good. If you left the cap off a new bottle of brake fluid in the humid summer of Florida, that brake fluid would go bad pretty quick as it rapidly draws moisture in. However, since the contamination is just water, it would still look like good fluid. Do I need to upgrade my brake fluid for performance brakes? This question implies things that generally lead to a yes answer, but you don't necessarily have to. If you're going to take your car to the track, then the brake fluid probably does need to be upgraded. Getting the fastest lap time generates a lot of heat in brake calipers where your fluid will be. However, if you are upgrading to a larger caliper and rotor to get a little extra stopping power out of your daily driver and don't stop hard all the time, you can probably keep using whatever type of brake fluid was recommended from the factory, so long as it's compatible with whatever caliper you're swapping in. However, when replacing calipers, air needs to be bled from the system, so you will need to be putting in new brake fluid anyway. I'd like to leave you with a bit of advice about brake fluid, and that is to ignore all the fancy descriptions companies cover these bottles with and just look up their stats. Some of these will feature synthetic on them prominently like it's a selling point. DOT2 and DOT5 brake fluids aren't synthetic, everything else is unless it's something really odd. High performance? Big talk from a DOT3 brake fluid. This bottle even says low moisture formula. Well, I would hope so. Sounds like the equivalent of buying low mold cheddar cheese. I can only imagine these things end up on these bottles because it works on some people, and if a company doesn't put it on their bottle, they're losing a sale to the company that did, so please don't be swayed by that stuff. If you learned something, consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next Car Simplified video. Thanks for watching. Some of these will feature synthetic on them prominent. High performance, big talk from a DOT brake. Over time, moisture gets toim.